We're joining Riviera in Piraeus for a 10-day Mediterranean cruise. After one night in the Sofitel Airport Hotel in Athens, we go by taxi to the port of Piraeus to pick up Marina. Alongside us is Topaz, one of the world's largest super yachts, allegedly owned by Sheikh Mansour, who also owns Manchester City Football Club. Our first port of call is Kusadisi, Turkey. Kusadisi is the port for Ephesus, but on this occasion we're not going there. We've booked a private tour to see 3 other ancient Greek and Roman towns in the opposite direction from Ephesus. Priene was constructed in the 4th century BC, started by King Mausolus and continued by Alexander the Great. The theatre is unusual in still being in its original Greek form. It wasn't modified by the Romans, as they didn't consider Priene to be an important place anymore. The Romans would have built a large wall behind the stage area, and that's absent here. Also characteristically Greek, the sacrificial altar and the throne-like chairs for dignitaries. Also, the front of the seating area is level with the performing area. Next to the theatre is an early Christian church. The Temple of Athena. That retaining wall has stood there for nearly 2,500 years. The ruins of the Agora. And the city's parliament meeting place. When it was originally built, Priene was a port, but the sea has retreated a long way since then. About 15 miles from Priene is Miletus, whose theatre has definitely been modified by the Romans. These massive entrance tunnels are original, exactly as the Romans left them. The fort on top of the theatre is Ottoman. Miletus was the city from which St. Paul was taken to Rome for his trial. That's a 14th century Ottoman caravanserai, and over there are the old Roman baths. Miletus was also a port, a very important one, but once again the sea has long gone. The entrance to the Roman baths. You have to imagine this completely clad in white marble, About 10 miles from Miletus is Didyma and the enormous temple to Apollo, the second largest anywhere in the world. Only the priests were allowed in the interior part of the temple, where they would consult the oracle. Our next stop is Santorini, the southernmost island of the Cyclades. We are anchored in the caldera left by a massive volcanic eruption about 1600 BC. On top of the cliff is Thera, the main town, which we have to reach by cable car after tendering ashore. Anchored with us today is Ocean Princess. The Sant'Osia Museum has three-dimensional copies of wall frescoes from the archaeological site of Akrotiri. These were created by the Minoan civilization that lived here prior to the volcanic eruption. After the culture, it's time for sightseeing and shopping around the town of Thera. The streets are narrow and the shops are generally not the worst kind of tourist tat. We stopped for coffee at a cafe with great views over the caldera and down the side of the cliff, where it seems that every square inch has been occupied by a cafe or a hotel. Resuming our walk, we seem to have found some even more expensive shops. Looking down at the place where the tenders bring us ashore. Having come down, we can see the cable car operating above us. At the end of the island is the village of Ia, which claims to have the best sunsets in the Mediterranean. Our next call was due to be Taormina in Sicily, but due to anticipated bad weather, it was switched to nearby Messina, and our one sea day on Riviera certainly experienced very heavy rain. Sailing into Messina just after dawn, we're passing the statue of Stella Maris protecting the harbour. In the background, across the Strait of Messina, is the Italian mainland. Much of modern-day Messina is post-World War II reconstruction. We're in the Cathedral Square with its 16th century Fountain of Orion. The bell tower's mechanical clock dates only from the 1930s and performs once a day at noon. The cathedral itself dates from the 12th century, but was almost entirely rebuilt in 1920 following a disastrous earthquake, and then again in the 1940s following Second World War damage. So we're back on board in time for lunch, and this is the view from our balcony. And this is the Times crossword being attempted. Amalfi lies on the Gulf of Salerno, just south of the Sorrento Peninsula. Amalfi was a major maritime state for about 300 years before Venice really got going. We come ashore by tender and have a quick look round the town. The 11th century Cathedral of St Andrew dominates the main square. Back to the small harbour to board the coastal ferry that will take us up to Positano. Hauling up the anchor, and in about half an hour we're approaching Positano. The main landmark is the church with its Majolica tiled dome. When we stop for coffee, we're treated to the town's band marching past. After our coffee break, we set about a stroll around the town to take in the sights. We had lunch at this cafe later. The Church of Santa Maria Assunta was originally built in the 12th century to house an icon stolen from Byzantium. Its current shape dates mainly from an 18th century restoration. Continuing our walk up the hill, past various shops, we find another small church. After lunch, we reboard the ferry for our return to Amalfi and to take in the stunning sights of the Amalfi coast. Back in Amalfi, it turns out we haven't done enough shopping yet, so there needs to be time for a personal consultation. Civitavecchia is the port for Rome, but this time we're not going into Rome. Instead, we're taking a ship's tour to Ostia Antica, the ancient port of Rome. Ostia is about an hour's drive away from Civitavecchia, near the airport of Fiumicino. Our guided tour starts with the necropolis, the cemetery. Moving on from the necropolis, we now head for the centre of the main town. The statue is Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Most of the brickwork we can see has been restored, although mainly with the original bricks. Almost all the marble cladding has gone. From a first floor vantage point, we can see some of the size of the site of Ostia Antica. It was thought that the peak population of the city was about 100,000. However, recent discoveries indicate that the total size of the city was about 4 times this. Work going on to conserve a large mosaic in the Baths of Neptune. A street of apartment blocks. These would have been 3 or 4 stories high. In front of the theatre is the Square of Corporations. The buildings round here were probably commercial offices. Many have mosaic floors, which seem to refer to the business that may have been transacted there. The square was surrounded by a portico, and there was a temple in the middle. The theatre dates from the 2nd century AD and could hold about 4,000 people. The exterior walls of the theatre. This was a laundry. This is the interior of a large private house, obviously belonging to a wealthy family. They even had their own private toilet. Luxury. Most people had to make do with the public toilets, very communal. The Forum was the main public square of a Roman city. At one end is the Capitolium, a temple dedicated to the three main Roman deities, Jupiter, Juno and Minerva. This is a taverna, which would have served hot and cold food as well as drink. More apartment blocks, and after 2.5 hours of an excellent guided tour by our guide Barbara, it's time to head back to the coach and eventually back to our ship. Livorno was for centuries the major port of Tuscany. It's still an important port and is the gateway for cruise ship passengers to Florence, Pisa and the rest of Tuscany. The port and city were very badly damaged by bombing during the Second World War. From Riviera's berth, there's no need for a shuttle. We can walk to the old town. Livorno's many canals can be quite picturesque. The statue is Grand Duke Ferdinand I, and it commemorates his clearing the seas, allegedly, of African pirates, hence the bronze African slaves. On the Via Grande, the colonnades of shops are post-war replacements of those ancient ones destroyed in the Second World War. The Piazza Grande is home to the Duomo, Livorno's cathedral. This is a 1950s replica of the one destroyed in the Second World War. The original was completed in 1603, this replacement in 1952. Continuing along Via Grande, here's a building that survived the Second World War bombing, complete with Medici coat of arms. This cisterna was built in the early 19th century as part of the city's water supply. At the end of Via Grande is the Piazza della Repubblica, Livorno's largest public square. It's dominated by two large statues, and over there on a bench I think I can see a British tourist. At one end of the piazza is the New Fortress from the late 16th century, and the statue of Archduke Ferdinand III, which also records the result of the referendum on Italian unity in 1860. At the other end of the square, Archduke Leopold II. Back to the ship, which laid on a red carpet welcome for those passengers who'd taken long day trips to places as far away as Florence. The Principality of Monaco is the second smallest independent country on Earth after the Vatican. We're anchored because Mein Schiff has the only berth in the harbour. The casino and opera house. The less than 1 square mile of Monaco attracts the rich and famous from around the world, and the Principality enjoys the highest gross domestic product per capita in the world. The tender brings us ashore in Port Hercule, and we can begin our walk to the old town. This is the back of the Oceanographic Institute, and from here we take lifts and escalators to get us to the higher level in front of the Institute. It's like Grand Central for Toy Town trains. In a couple of minutes we arrive in front of Monaco Cathedral. It was consecrated in 1875 and many of the ruling Grimaldi family are buried in here. The tomb of Princess Grace. The Council of State and the main court building. A couple of minutes walk and we're in the Palace Square. The palace is a hodgepodge of styles put together over several centuries. It's based on a Genoese fortress from about the 12th century. From this side of the palace there's a good view over most of Monaco. Francois Grimaldi founded the ruling dynasty by taking the rock by stealth, disguised as a monk. The palace guard is changed every hour. Once a day there's a more elaborate ceremony, but we miss that. From this side of the palace there's a view over the Port of Fontainebleau. More yachts. Facing the palace, a museum and the streets leading back into the old town. Some nice looking cafes and restaurants. The Chapel of Mercy dates from 1639. Back to the harbour for the tender to the ship, and then sit on our balcony and enjoy the view for the rest of the afternoon. Our final port of call is Marseille, France's second largest city. On the island in the bay is the Château d'If, the setting of Dumas' novel The Count of Monte Cristo. Along with Carol and Dan, we've booked a private tour to Aix-en-Provence and Avignon. Our sightseeing begins with the cathedral in Aix. The cathedral has elements from the Romanesque, Gothic and Renaissance periods. The baptistry dates back to the 5th century. The cloister is from the late 12th century. This is the Romanesque nave, the oldest of the three naves. This is the second oldest, the Gothic nave with the organ. And this is the Renaissance nave. Directly opposite the cathedral, this building is now part of the University of Aix. Formerly the Archbishop's Palace, this is now a museum. The former Corn Exchange building in the Town Hall Square. The Town Hall. The Palais de Justice dates from the 1830s. There's our excellent guide, Johan. This broad avenue is the Cours Mirabeau, laid out in the late 17th century. Our walking tour finishes at the Fontaine de la Rotonde. Avignon is famous for two things, the bridge and the Papal Palace. 7 popes lived in Avignon in the 14th century, rather than in Rome due to the political situation. Only 4 of the original 22 arches of the bridge remain. They date from the 13th century, and flooding did away with the rest of them. The city walls were built during the time that the popes lived in Avignon. Next to the Papal Palace is the Cathedral of Notre Dame, which predates the Papal occupation. We decided not to do the internal tour of the Papal Palace, which from the outside has the look more of a fortress than a palace. We had a late lunch in an open-air restaurant in one of the city squares before heading back to Marseille to reboard Riviera for the final time.